Hello and welcome to Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro, a podcast where we delve into the technical aspects of the mining industry. My name's Tarrant Elkington, General Manager for Snowden Optiro here in Perth, Western Australia. Today's topic is going to be one for the investors and also technical people related to it. And it's really looking at ASX announcements, particularly when people are putting out mineral resource estimates or MREs, and just some of the technical things that people should be aware of when they're looking at them, because obviously these things can make huge difference for share prices and things like that. So I think it's worth being aware of some of the pitfalls or the places to look for. So with me to talk about this, we've got Matt Walker, who's a principal consultant with us here in Snowden Optiro. He's got more than 15 years of experience covering exploration, resource, mine production, geology aspects, and produced a number of these. I've been involved in producing a number of these reports and reviewing them. So thanks very much for joining us today, Matt.
Thanks, Tarrant. Definitely an important topic, and I think we can give a little bit of an insight from what a geologist would be looking for, and some of the nuances and the technicalities that are really important to really cut through some of the wording that often gets put out there.
Yeah, it'd be great for me as a mining person to understand it all better. So I think maybe we could start off by looking at what are some of the minimum requirements that somebody should put into an announcement that includes an MRE.
Yeah, so first of all, the MRE is going to be prepared in accordance with the JORC Code, and that current iteration is the 2012 version. So we're moving to a 25 or potentially 26 version that's going to come out. The MRE is going to be produced by a suitably qualified competent person, and that's defined as clause 11 in the JORC Code, and they're going to be working within the guidance of that code. And essentially, a competent person is going to be a minerals industry professional. They're going to be a member or a fellow of a registered professional organisation, and they're essentially going to have 5 years relevant experience in the style of the mineralisation or the type of the deposit that they're going to be taking accountability for. Additionally, this accountability is going to be different, whether they're reporting on exploration results, doing an evaluation of an estimation, or an economic extraction. So we're looking at this stage at the ore reserve component. The public report itself is going to be based on the work of the competent person, and then that has to follow a series of ASX Listing Rule criteria. And specifically, this is Chapter 5, which will cover the mining and reporting of exploration activities. And again, they have to work within the framework of the jurisdiction they're in, which is Australia, generally for the ASX. And then there's a few mandatory items, and that's covered under Listing Rule 5.8.1. And that's really going to outline the geology and the interpretation method that's been used. And then it will talk about the drilling methods, the sampling, and the subsampling. There'll be a description of the cutoff grade that's been used and the sort of the reasoning behind that. And again, the estimation methodology and strategy. And then the mandatory requirement as under JORC is going to be the classification criteria and how they've determined what criteria should be applied. And there'll be some other factors, mining considerations and modifying factors. And then bolted onto the back. So that should be in the main part of the report with equal provenance as anything else. And then as an appendices, you're going to have the JORC Table 1. And that'll have the various sections that depend on what you're reporting on. So 1 to 3 would be for an MRE, and then you tack on 4 for an ore reserve. And then you get the generic boilerplate stuff. So you'll have the CP sign-off, which will detail the experience, what responsibilities the competent person's actually agreeing to, that they've cited the report and they are in agreement with what's being published in the public domain. And I know from our business, we'll send an official documentation that will accompany that, and we do a lot of back and forth reviewing the report and just tempering what gets put in there. So I think the main point I want to sort of highlight on that is this is the minimum criteria. So, we always strive to go above and beyond where we can and develop that skill set. But essentially, the reporting is going to be, you basically have a process where you have to have continuous disclosures to the market of material information, and that is obligations are covered under the rules. Then the information within the report is going to be prepared in accordance with the code. So that's the subtle difference. I think a lot of people use those interchangeably, but they are quite clear on where the boundaries lie. For me, there's so much information out there. It does get a little bit confusing, but I think there's, a monograph 30 by the AusIMM was a really good starting point. And there's heaps of information in there. So I think that's a good point to reference if you're ever unsure.
Yeah, and I think, when we talk about the minimum requirement, it's also incumbent upon that release to suitably, educate investors about what's actually going on, right? That's the underlying tone is that if it's important, if it's material, then the investor should be informed,
absolutely,
and not be obscured in the documentation.
Yeah.
Just maybe if you could explain when would somebody put out an MRE release?
So again, it's it'd be a material component, a material update to a release, or it's a maiden resource for the very first time. So these are the obligations under the rules, and they have to inform the market of what's actually going on. So if you had a mineral resource update that supersedes another resource, then you would very much have to release this information to the market.
And it's kind of what you get. You generally see the drilling results coming through in the period leading up to it, and this is what's the culmination of that. Right?
That's right. Yeah, and there is a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. You've got to review the exploration results, and then you've got to do all of that due diligence work to validate it, produce the MRE. So there can be quite a time frame, or you may want to do an additional drilling exercise to try and capture as much potential of that resource. So if you've got onto a new shoot or whatever, that's going to delay that. But again, when you're reporting the exploration results, I would ordinarily expect that they would say that, due to success, that we've pushed out an MRE for this reason. So
yeah. And I think there's these are often highly anticipated, and particularly what we call maiden, MRE, which is the first time something's released, or when there's a lot more data, or when there's been a large time between estimates or things like that, right? So it's important to that this could change the price of the stocks for people.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what are some of the things, like as a geologist, when you're reviewing what somebody else has put out in a public release, what are some of the things you see or you think might be?
So definitely I have a list of probably 10 sort of components that I will look at, but I'll go through my hit list and then I'll go through my key points. So superlatives are a big one for me. So if you see the world's biggest, or this is a groundbreaking discovery,
so many,
everyone claims to have this, so that's and it may well be, but I want to see the data behind it to support that claim. Again, the complexity and the complexity of the interpretation and the complexity of the estimation strategy that's been used, that can often give you a lot of information of how hard the geos have been working to try and pull this all together. So I think if you're seeing a lot of complex MIK estimate, it gives me an impression that it's a tricky deposit. It's not just a straightforward situation.
What is a tricky, what's the implications of a tricky deposit?
If it's early stage data and we've got a tricky deposit, we just don't fully understand it, and that's where you need drilling to inform those decisions. So, absolutely. Another situation, and this is mainly sort of when you see technical reports and presentations, is a lot of peer comparison work, and you've got to be particularly careful with this sort of situation. Make sure the information is materially correct and it's properly referenced and sourced. And there's been some guidance notes been put out from the regulator on that last year, I believe. And again, that talks to visual estimates and social media posts and stuff like that. So additionally, the competent person, you get a bit of a feel for when you start reading these reports and where people, what consultancy they're going to, or a competent person within the company, and you start to, I call it the fingerprint. You see that style of reporting, and you get a bit of a feel for how they're operating, what they rely on for their classification, etc. So you can sort of start building up a bit of a picture.
When you think about like companies are able to report internally, and they do, what's typically the difference between a resource that's generated internally or externally? I guess it's
again, it's a very fine line. I think do they have information that they're not willing to present to the market? And again, it comes down to that criteria of materiality. Like they may say, an internal grade control model is probably acceptable. You don't need to release that. That would be my understanding. But then certainly if you've done a whole heap of drilling and you've found that the continuity wasn't there, or the estimate's been fundamentally changed because of this new data, then that is essential. That is material that needs to be out there for investors to make decisions.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, so on that, my key items is when there's in the appendices, you'd have the table 1, and there's a statement in that I always go to straight away, and that's whether there's any other geological interpretation is possible. And I think a lot of the time it says no, this is it. And I think there can be a little bit more material put on that, and it's all right to test different interps, and one should be striving to do that. So that's just an interesting point. If I see that, I start thinking, what
too
else
much
could
confidence in.
Well, it's
in a very uncertain.
It's a very uncertain science, and to fully lock yourself into one idea is can lead to a lot of issues sometimes. But again, I know from our business point of view, we like to see an optimization. It's very hard, projects at different stages, but I know we could certainly pull on a whole remit of data that we would could benchmark against other companies, or if they don't have a mill, what haulage options would be available. And certainly when we do review work, we would run an Opti as pretty much par for the course sort of thing. So
I think it's this talks to the concept of reasonable prospects of at the moment eventual economic extraction, right? Where you should be able to demonstrate that there's the possibility that resource could be economically extracted in the future. Otherwise, don't report it. And I think one of the critical parts of that is to see whether it has been a constrained resource or it's an unconstrained resource. Because there are many out there that do it, and I think particularly before this came in or whatever, we would review projects. Lots of them had 3 million ounces, 4 million ounces. But a lot of them are at depth, low grade, and just would never be extracted by open pit or underground means. And I think it's a little bit, can be misleading to present that as such. So I think if you ever see particularly if you ever see really big numbers in a resource, report, have a look and see whether it's actually constrained, because that gives you an idea if it's not just the confidence in the geology, but will it actually end up being something?
It is tricky though, because some of the price assumptions that we built into those, even a year ago, are completely changed now. So you got to be sort of dynamic in that regard. So that's why I don't, best practice would see that and the justification that goes into it. But we do agree that it is a very tricky situation.
Yeah, I think the main point for me is the spirit or the intent
exactly,
of that. And we don't want to be reporting material that is half a gram ton 1,500 meters under the under the surface, right?
Yeah.
You know, so but I think it's worth, you know, that comes down to the disclosure, the transparency of what you're doing, and not trying to over present something that will never get
That's right.
extracted.
And then I guess finally, just like a few more hit items would be, so just talking on to that optimization is, you know, obviously when there's an ore reserve announced, you can look at those resource to reserve conversion ratios. And then I would be looking at the percentiles of the measured to indicated to inferred and just try and get a feel for how that is. And again, just simple stuff like clear imagery, like a resource classification long section against the drill pierce points. You know, try and be as transparent with the information as possible, and keep it simple where you can, just so, you know, at first glance you can start to tie together all these pieces of information. You've got a nice referenced image to look at.
Absolutely. So if you talk to the imagery, you know, sometimes people like to show these nice glossy sections. What sort of things would you be looking for in that like those sections that you see? Like,
yes, that it's been presented well, that the information is transparent and it's not hiding anything. So they've listed the intercepts, whether it be a gram meter or a physical gold grade or whatever commodity it is, and then again, like that the resource has been put within a pit shell. That all that information is there, RLs. Maybe some MSO outlines, something like that, just to tie it all together. So
it's worth really looking at those, because if you only have like one or two holes on a section, right, it gives you a feel for how much, you know, there's numbers there, but how much confidence there are in them, right? And you know, one thing that I always look at is how, you know, want to know is how thick the ore, you know, how wide the ore body is, because sometimes you get these very high grade resources reported, but we know if they're very thin, you know, that they're potentially going to be diluted, you know, when you mine and you take more. So you shouldn't just take that grade on face value, whereas something like that's a porphyry, big bulk thing, you know, might, you know, be less of an issue, right?
And that's why for sort of a narrow vein system, gram meters is a powerful tool to communicate both that thickness and grade.
What about classification? So, you know, I think we both saw the results from the Parker Challenge, which looks at, you know, taking different, you know, a number of people putting in a resource estimate for the same set of data, and it showed a wide range, particularly in classification, between different people looking at the same data, exactly the same data. You know, so what do you think about with classification, and why is it important? Why shouldn't somebody, you know, an inferred resource is a very, you know, should be looked at in a certain way, right?
I mean, the first point of that is it's amazing that we still, I mean, it was the same case 2 years ago, that we still have this massive divergence of classification reporting between practitioners. I guess the only way you would sort of move away from that is being more prescriptive, which is absolutely what we don't want to do, in my opinion. But obviously, to me, like I'm very stringent with my measured category, and unless I had production data, close space drilling, and basically we would limit that to the production front, or maybe 1 or 2 years drill out ahead of that, because obviously that's the highest confidence criteria that you essentially you're going to go there and get this material and get it through the plant within, let's say, 10% variance. And then moving from that, the indicated resource as well, it's got to have a basis that when we do the mine plan, that we have some certainty that we're going to have some, like, the material is going to be there. Again, you know, a rule of thumb would be plus or minus 20% or whatever. So, but inferred, it's really, there's inferred and then there's inferred. So I think that is the real sort of nuts and bolts of it. So
is there the follow on from that, the question of extrapolation?
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And so could you maybe explain to us a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, so if we've got data that, as a block that's been informed by data, one would interpolation is basically going inwards. Other than that, you're going to have a block that's going to be extrapolated too. So if you've got blocks on the perimeter, you're going to be naturally extrapolating grades from the last data points out to a certain distance. And wherever you draw that line of where your wireframe terminates, the classic rule of thumb is half your drill spacing. But this limit can get pushed, and then obviously that extrapolation is going to get pushed with it. So there's no harm in pushing your wireframe out, but then you can handle it with a classification. So I think it's best practice to report that. That what material's been filled in what pass is quite a neat way of telling the reader what's actually happened with the estimate.
So if and that's something that you can often see in the sections.
That's right.
When you can see where's the last drill hole and how far has been extended, and was that last drill hole a really good drill hole? Because sometimes that could drive half of the of the metal in an estimate.
That's right.
And it's got nothing supporting it.
Yeah.
What about and I think, just to come back to the classification point, from my perspective on the mining side, I don't see there's a huge thing around measured and indicated. I think it's just, by the time it's indicated, you can be used in a mine plan and created for reserve. So make sure that we consider that. And that's what can get converted to a reserve. So you can move forward to further studies with it. If it's just inferred, it can't be, right? So I guess, I think there's probably a whole bunch more things that we can talk about, but I think hopefully that's a good list to start with for our listeners and viewers. And really, thanks for joining us, Matt. I really appreciated the discussion.
Sure, it's been great.
And I hope you all enjoyed the podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or other podcast platforms. And I look forward to the next Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro podcast.